Hello and
Good
welcome to High
morning,
Five Live.
everyone.
It might not be morning where you are, but it's morning where we are.
Yes, and it's a great morning. We have a beautiful, wonderful, intelligent, amazing, creative,
Inspiring.
yes, guest with us
remarkable.
today. We're so grateful to have Angie Lucas with us. As we begin, I will just tell you a little bit about her.
But first, let me tell you, as
yes.
you're watching, please just tell us where you're watching from. Be so fun because we'd love to communicate with you as the broadcast is over and answer any questions you have. And so anything you want to know about, just put it right there in the chat.
Yes, that would be wonderful. So this lady, we are friends, and she actually is also friends to two of our daughters.
Yay,
one from high
us.
school, and one because our daughter runs a theater program, and her daughter's been in that. Angie's daughter's been in that. So we have some connections here, and we have seen her compassionate service in what she does with her church calling and Relief Society.
Yeah,
and
she's transformational, really excited president that changes everyone's life, right?
But Angie, she used to edit magazines, compose ad copy, and ghostwrite articles to for tech CEOs. And now she writes little stories
for herself.
Finally.
And we're so glad that she kind of found time to do this, because she writes about big childhood challenges with her storybooks.
And can I add, big challenges for everyone else too?
Because you never outgrow storybooks, right?
You never outgrow these challenges.
Right.
It's such a beautiful way to be able to address them. So
amen. So through her picture books about grief and loss, embarrassing family secrets, and getting lost in a grocery store, she hopes to spark essential conversations between kids and their caregivers. And this lady is a lifelong language lover and unapologetic word nerd. And we can relate to that.
She can.
And we also love yoga and freshly sharpened pencils and fresh mountain air and volunteering. As we said, she is amazing at that. And she is the mother of one child through marriage, one through adoption, and one through birth. And she lives with this precious patchwork of family in Bluffdale, Utah, where we also live.
Those are her beautiful words. So you can tell she's a wordsmith for sure.
I like to say that I've won the motherhood trifecta because I have one of each. I have
there you go.
a child, an adopted child, and then one I managed to give birth to finally.
Yes, and we'll
when
hear
you were
more
41,
about that.
right?
Yep, 41. Yep.
Oh, amazing.
Oh, goodness. Well, Angie,
you've had lots of opportunities in your life where you
really
have made compassionate connection too.
Yeah, and I totally relate to that and I wanted to take a minute here and thank our virtual compassionate people, our viewers that have prayed for me while I have been down with a broken leg. I dislocated my ankle falling and broke both bones, and I have had so many beautiful messages from our viewers on High Five Live, and they've been praying for me, and I want to thank all of you who have done that.
Now that's compassionate connection.
It is virtual.
All around. It works in so many ways these days.
Yes, but I have felt those prayers, and I am so appreciative. And, I could not have done this without the love of others. I just don't know how I would have done it, especially my friends and my family and all of you and my sweet husband who's just taking care of me while I can't even walk. So anyway,
but we have a lot of fun because when she needs to be transported, she just jumps on my back.
It works.
We do piggyback wherever we go.
That's perfect. I love that. I want to see this happen.
Oh, but you totally get it. You've had so many experiences in your life when you've needed compassionate connection.
You want to talk to us about that a little? Help
Sure.
people get to know your soul and your story.
Absolutely. Yes. So one of the truths that I have lived my way into over the last, 10, 12 years is that, as much as someone wants to help take our pain away, they can't. And as much as we would want to take someone else's pain away, the best way to help someone who's in grief or having another kind of challenge is to show up with compassionate connection. That's sort of the theme of our show today that we're going to be talking about. But knowing you're not alone, knowing somebody cares, those little, even in little ways, can help us through our most challenging times. And connection can come through individuals, in person. I think in person is wonderful, but also online, through books. When you read a story or a book where you see yourself reflected in some way, that sense of connection, that sense of, hey, other people understand how I feel, and someone else has been able to put what I feel into words, is so affirming. And it's so, it can be so connective and make you feel that you have a little bit more strength to carry on. And we can find these kind of connections even through family history, through learning more about our ancestors and finding out that they've been through similar things, and that they can give us strength also.
Absolutely. I love that.
You have had experiences where you've received compassionate connection. Do you want to talk about one of those? Or
We all have our challenges, but be able to express them and write about them and help others is a real gift. And you have that.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah. So I struggled with infertility for 10 years, which is a long time. And during that time, the first part of that time, I felt like the way to show strength is to just handle it with no need for anyone else. I could just I didn't really want to talk about it. I wanted to just prove to everyone that I was strong enough to do this. And even though I'm the second oldest of 6 children, I come from the most traditional LDS family you can imagine. Everyone got married, stay married, had big families. Like all of my cousins had larger families. From my grandparents and all of my aunts and uncles, there was never even a divorce, except one, but she remarried her husband again. It just was I had such a different experience because I got married a little bit older, at least for Utah. I'm, married at around 28. That's old in Utah, or at the time it was. That's young other places, but and then while I'm the second oldest of 6 children and I was having nieces and nephews born left and right, I was unable to have children. And I was always that kid who had someone else's baby at church. I was always, a mini mother to my younger siblings. I loved babies. And it was such a heartbreaking challenge to be on the sidelines and feeling like my life wasn't really going the way it was supposed to. And I married this wonderful man who had a 9-year-old son when we got married. So he was divorced. So I was immediately a stepmother, and I just didn't have, a model for that. I didn't have,
what do we do?
I just didn't have a experience with blended families that I had seen. And so I just had, maybe a non-traditional experience, which I think is becoming more and more common in the culture we live in. I mean, divorce is very common. Step families and blended families are very common, but I just didn't have a model for that. And on top of that, having the infertility, it was a hard thing. And it wasn't until I learned to open up a little bit. So we started looking into adoption, and I went to an adoption conference, and I met a wonderful friend who's my dear friend to this day. She was the presenter. It's the funniest story. She was up there presenting this story at this blog conference, and then I blogged about her, and then she Googled herself and she found my blog. And so now we're best friends. Now.
I love it.
And there's connection.
Yeah, that fun. It was a wonderful connection, and she was an adoptive mother. And what I learned from her was that talking about infertility is not harder than not talking about it. And I mean, with the right person, you don't need to just broadcast your challenges to the whole world. But when you are able to share something that's painful with someone who meets you with compassion, there's magic there. And I feel like that's one of the purposes that, faith traditions have, confession for, even things for sin and other things, because once you are able to express something that's been weighing you down and you are met with this compassionate face and this, you're okay, I see you, that is so healing. And it's so important than just keeping it in where it just weighs us down heavier.
Yeah.
So those were important lessons to realize that once I was able to start feeling the pain of it and sharing it with the right people And now I'm at the point where I can talk about it openly to thousands of people. But there was a time I wouldn't have been able to imagine sharing it because it was too heavy. But, and once I started that little process, I also realized, the ultimate compassionate connector is our Savior. And when I was able to turn to him in prayer and really unburden my heart, that was extremely healing. But until I let myself feel it, I could not get to that point.
That's right.
That is such a beautiful lesson. And we appreciate so much you being willing to share it.
Absolutely. And so some of these experiences instigated the idea, and you can talk about this more, but to write a book for children, because we can understand a lot more than they can, and they have their own way of dealing with things. And you have been able to tap into that. So tell us about your book.
Okay. Yes. My first book is My Big Dumb Invisible Dragon, and it is a grief allegory for children. And this story came about through a grief experience of my own. Angela read a little bit about my bio, but for a long time, I was too afraid to really pursue what I really wanted to do, which is write books, and write for children. I just thought I didn't have any way to break into that industry. I didn't know how to do it. It was scary. How could I, put myself out there? And, so I would do things like work for marketing departments or magazines or, ghostwrite, because then I was kind of hidden behind.
Yeah.
But interestingly, my journey with infertility and the courage it took to get through that it's like courage begets courage, right? Mm-hmm. So and it took all the courage in the world to face down my infertility problem. It's like the fight of my life to get my family, my patchwork family here together. It took so much out of me to be able to do that. And it was just bit by bit of a little bit more courage. And I think often that my son, who was finally born when I was 41, the process it took of bringing him is what opened me up to be able to do this, honestly, because like one kind of courage teaches you that you have enough courage to do another.
That's right.
Another thing. And I think I just had decided I don't want to live my life wondering what if I had only taken this step or that step. What could I have done something that I always dreamed of doing? So I was able to adopt my daughter, and that's a miracle story. About 6 years into my infertility challenge, I finally was able to bring home this beautiful baby girl, and she was a dream. I mean, in fact, I was a scrapbook magazine editor for a while, and I just noticed back here behind me, like here's some pictures of her when she was a baby. I wasn't planning.
Yeah. A dream indeed.
Her little growth chart. So she was just this beautiful little angel, and such a dream how that all came together. And one thing I also learned from this dear friend of mine, her name's Laurianne Thorpe, I'll just throw that in there, the one that I met through the adoption conference, is that adoption cures childlessness, but it doesn't necessarily cure infertility. So I did have this beautiful baby. And then I found myself just aching for a sibling near her age, because my stepson was 16 years old when we brought her home. And I didn't know a life without siblings. My 6 siblings were such a big part of my life. I couldn't even imagine her growing up without siblings. And so I put everything into this journey to try to get her a sibling. And we tried to adopt again, but we just kept hitting brick wall after brick wall with that. And, finally we decided to turn back to like medical interventions, which we had tried before, but this time we kind of took the next level up, and there's always another level you can try, and there's never any guarantees, and it's so expensive. And we were blessed to finally be at a position financially where we at least had the possibility of pursuing some of these other interventions. And after 10 years of infertility, I was finally pregnant. And I was over the moon. I could not believe it. Things were going along beautifully. I had doctors telling me, my doctor told me that like, there's a minuscule chance anything goes wrong at this point. Things look so great. I saw my little baby waving her arms and legs on ultrasound and everything. I couldn't believe this was happening, and my kids were going to be close enough together like I wanted. And then at a routine ultrasound, I went in and there was no heartbeat. And
Oh my goodness.
it was like the world just crashed down. I felt, all the feelings like it's not fair. I mean, I spent so long and I tried so hard, and how and why, So I just, infertility itself is its own form of grief. They call it disenfranchised grief because it's not as traditionally recognized, and there's not always, there's not a specific person you're mourning always, but there is this dream of a person and of a family and of what your life was going to be. And I had been experiencing grief in cycles through the whole 10 years. And then this was a new kind of grief. It just really brought me to my knees, and I had to pull out all of the stops to, get through that moment. And I had neighbors and friends show up with a loaf of bread or a necklace that had like 3 little eggs for my little children in it, like a little nest with little eggs, and just these gestures that made me feel like somebody sees me and knows. It didn't take it away. It didn't solve it, but it helped me feel seen and like I could move forward. And in the process of this whole journey, while I'm getting the courage to do these medical interventions that are scary and expensive and there's no guarantees, I was, simultaneously branching out into writing more children's stories and trying that. And I went to a conference and I met this editor, and I had been working on a book. She was looking for books about how to help children deal with their emotions. And I was trying to put my grief experience into words in a way that felt universal and that the kind of book that would have helped me feel seen. And over the course of many different drafts, I had different metaphors I tried. I landed on this metaphor of a dragon and this idea of this. It felt like there was a shadow over me. It felt like there was this heaviness on my chest. I felt and like this cocooning feeling sometimes. Sometimes I just wanted to curl up in the grief and just sit there with it. And sometimes it felt so heavy, it was hard to get out of bed. And it just felt like it's like there's a dragon sitting on me. So I just worked through the story of a little boy who has this dragon show up out of the blue and weighing him down, and all the ways he attempts to get rid of it, which mirror the stages of grief, which Scott, you can speak to, the anger and the bargaining and all the things we go through when we're grieving. And it just kind of was serendipity or a miracle or the perfect timing, because this editor was looking for this exact kind of story. So it came together, and the editor herself had recently lost her mother. And I wanted to keep the story very vague as far as we didn't know what kind of grief the boy was experiencing. It just was this dragon swooped in, but she helped me understand that it's very important to see who, for a concrete story, because a concrete story allows us to find our own way through. If you keep it too vague, that can be hard to relate to. And story is so important to have just a concrete narrative, and you can read it and you will find your own pieces of it that relate to you. And that's, the best way we learn is when we can find our own message in the story rather than have someone just tell it. That's why story is so powerful. And that's why Jesus taught in parables too.
So true. And you've done such a wonderful job. I mean, this little boy, what he goes through, and each phase of grief, I can just imagine any parent or anyone being able to really talk about the feelings they have and the issues they go through and what it's like and what it's like to try to get rid of that, and having others who don't understand say, well, when do you think you're going to get over this? And you don't get over it.
No.
And it's so,
you deal with it.
Yeah. And it's so perfectly structured in your book. And we are so excited to give this to people who need it. We have some dear, dear friends who just lost a 9-year-old to leukemia. And I know that this book can be a blessing in that family's life. So thank you so much for writing it. And if you want to go to, tell them how to find it on YouTube and listen to this cute little boy's voice.
Oh, it's so great.
Tell that story.
Yeah, so there's if you just Google My Big Dumb Invisible Dragon on YouTube, and I don't know if you have show notes, we could put the link in there.
Yes, we can put the link in there.
You can listen to this. It's a little 7-year-old boy who's the same age as the little narrator in the story. Read the story in this childlike voice, start to finish, and it's so sweet. My publisher put that together. He's the son of one of the people who work at the publishing company. He read that story, and it was so beautiful. And one thing I was going to mention is that in the story, the boy loses his mother, and it happens off the page. You don't see anything about that, but it's heavily implied, so you know who he has lost. And one thing that's beautiful about picture books is that, you know, my editor had lost her mother, and the illustrator had recently lost a dear friend, and all of us are kind of putting pieces of ourselves and our own story into this story of grief. And so it's about a specific kind of grief for this one boy, but anyone who's had any kind of grief can bring their own story to it and find that moment of connection and like, oh, I remember how that feels, or I know how that feels. I've had, when people reach out to me, one woman said that she had lost a parent when she was a very young child. And she said that she had wished that she had had this story at that point, and it was healing for her even reading it as an adult. And I think any kind of story that speaks to our souls can do that for us. And that, you know, again, that's why parables are so powerful, because there is about a specific story, but there's universal truth in there that we can relate to personally.
We just love it and love what you've done. And now you felt like there are more wonderful stories. Yeah. And this next one that you're producing at the present time is about a very important topic, about how important it is not to bury challenging, difficult stories from our family and from our lives and feelings. Yeah. You want to talk a little about what's happening next? Because
Sure. Yes, thank you. So I have another book called My Big Embarrassing Elephant. That one comes out this fall with a new publisher called Marble Press. And so this one is a metaphor about the elephant in the room. So it's a family experiencing a challenge. And this one is not specifically named, but everyone in the family deals with this elephant differently. One won't look at him, and one tries to sweep him under the rug, and one dances around him. And there's this one who's like, you guys,
there's an elephant.
Can we do something about this elephant in the room? And as the story goes on, she meets someone who shows her compassionate connection, this little narrator girl who helps her feel like you're not alone and shows her more productive ways to move through it. And sometimes it's just finding that one friend who knows what it's like to go through the same kind of challenge that you are going through. So yeah, I'm excited about that one. The illustrator is, he's an animator for Sesame Street. And so I'm very excited. His name's Pierre Colette Derby. I hope I'm saying that right. He's French. So forgive me for not having a good accent, but yeah.
Pierre sounded French.
We are so excited to have this new book, and it'll come out in the fall.
Fall of 2023.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Oh.
So why this particular story? And didn't you find some family history things or something that kind of helped you say, there's an elephant in everyone's room?
Yes, I think I'm a big lover of family history, as you know, that's another thing we have in common, and especially the story side. So throughout my journey, I have found hope and healing through when I find an ancestor. So one of the things was when I gave birth at 41, I felt so old, and my husband was 47 when my son was born. So we just felt like these ancient parents, right? Especially in Utah, where, you know, so many people have children young. And I was looking in family history, and I had one of those emails from Family Search that was like, you have a person in your family history who was in the Mormon battalion. So I just found myself like reading about him. And I found that when the last of his 25 children was born, he was 67 years old. So I was able to tell my husband, hey, he's 20 years older than you when he had his, and this is like 120 years ago. And his wife, because he had 3 different wives consecutively. I think the first 2, sadly, as was so common, died in childbirth. And he had several children with each, but the third one, she was 42 when her last child was born in 1897. So I told myself, okay, my ancestor, who is 42 years old, having a 10th child in 1897, I can do this in 2017 with modern medicine, and a well-equipped hospital, so it just those moments of seeing like, okay, I had ancestors who were old parents. That's the way things have always been, so that was very healing. And also finding the story of a stepmother in my family history. I didn't, I'd always thought of my immediate, up to my grandparent level as being so just standard traditional families, but looking a few generations back, I found stories of stepmothers and feeling some solidarity with this woman who, my fourth great grandfather was crossing the Atlantic Ocean with my fourth great grandmother and their 3 young sons. And she actually died on the journey and was buried at sea. And a woman on the ship started helping this grieving widower with his 3 young sons. And they ended up getting married when they landed. And she was 27, just like I was when I got married. So seeing these little moments of a woman who stepped in for 3 young sons, 3 young boys, and became their stepmother, I felt it's nice to see these little moments of connection in family history that tell you, hey, there's others who've gone through similar things. You can do it.
I don't think those are little moments. I think
they're big. Yeah. It's like a tender mercy to tell you like, hey, you're not even the first one in your family tree who's done this,
And to have that connection, excuse me, that connection with them.
Yes.
The eons of time, or however we want to say that, the veil.
Yeah.
To know that they are close and they know what we're going through and they can cheer us on, right?
It's kind of like a little wave, you get these little moments of like, hello, I see you from like, generations before. And
I think it really is a wave.
I do too.
I think they are very actively involved and want to influence our lives and say, hey, you're not alone.
That's right. Sometimes they are so close. Going through this surgery that I had to do and put the metal plate in with 7 screws. And it's been a challenge for me, but I have felt them help me and be there, especially my dad. And I just felt him say to me, I would take this away if I could. I would do this for you. And, and they are compassionate. They understand so much more. And we have all these stories, but this next book, like you were saying, talks about some of the hard things. And that's important, right?
Yeah.
Like you said, it's so important to talk about all of it and learn from all of it.
One of the things we found that I was looking through my great grandmother, and she's a woman I knew. She lived into her 90s. So I remember her. I was 21 years old and I still had all 4 grandparents and a great grandmother at that age. And I felt like so when my grandfather passed away when I was in my early 20s, it was like big. It was my first big, devastating feeling of grief because I had always had them, all 4 of them, plus a great grandmother. And as I was kind of looking back at her mother's story, her mother, I realized was older when she was born, and she passed away when my grandmother was quite young. And I found this other family that nobody knew about. She had 5 children before my great grandmother and her brother. And there must have been a divorce or something. But my great grandmother, who was passed out by the time I had found this story, nobody said a word about it. She had 5 children. And was there a divorce? We don't know. So there's this whole other family that I think in those days people wouldn't talk about. It was too shameful to be divorced or to deal, to have some of these things that happen in life, that it was just swept under the rug and hidden. And here I am and so I called my aunt, and she was like so I tried to call the oldest person still living in the family, and I called my aunt, and she said that she had recently just discovered this line too that was there, and she hadn't heard a word about it either. And that was her own grandmother had these 5 step siblings, or half siblings actually, that we still don't know. There's still a bit of a mystery. So, and they're in the same general county, like all the birth and death dates are still in not too far from where they lived. So it's amazing to think that I just wonder, I would love to ask my great grandmother, did you even know? Or is this a secret you kept, And
this is like a herd of elephants in the room.
Yes, the herd. So I think I think our culture is opening up so much, and there is more acceptance of these things that happen, and we don't have to feel shame when our family is not exactly how we pictured it would be, or our life doesn't turn out exactly how we think it should have, right? But
That is
Called
exactly.
mortality, right?
yes, it's life. And I think we're so much more accepting and understanding of these kinds of different paths that people's lives take. And there was a time when you just didn't talk about it.
That's right.
But still, I think it's a tendency to try to bury a lot of those things. And this next work you're doing is going to help us say, no, light is the best gift to an elephant, right?
Yeah. Sunlight is the best antidote to shame. That's what I've heard. I've read that. Dr.
Beautiful.
Brene Brown, I think, is the one that popularized that sentiment. But I've just, that has spoken strongly to me. This idea that, and it doesn't mean broadcast your challenges to the whole world.
No, it just means
one friend or one person who can be a bishop,
and even accepting it yourself and being able to face it. Yeah.
You're an example of that. And we are so appreciative of you writing these books, especially to help children, because they need it.
So, Angie, in closing, you've taken all these lessons in your life and become a connector, and you are busy connecting with people and helping and blessing others all the time. We want to thank you for that. You want to say anything in closing about what these lessons have meant and how they have blessed your life?
Thank you so much. You guys are great examples as well. I see the work you do to lift others just nonstop, and just our little corner of the world, and also broadcasting out. So I so appreciate you both. And
thank you.
Example you set, and I know your mom and your daughters, and it's just a wonderful family. And I think that, we have these things, these expectations about how our lives are going to go. And for me, it's helped to find this form of acceptance that how life is unfolding is the way it's supposed to, and just have that faith that the things that I've gone through are important for my growth and sometimes for others' growth. So and in my current calling in church, I have found so many times where a hard thing I've gone through in the past is exactly what I needed in order to relate to someone in the present today. And every time I have that experience where I'm able to say, I know what it feels like to have the challenges of a blended family, or the challenges of divorce. I didn't personally go through divorce, but I am a front row seat witness to the challenges of that. And infertility and loss and grief. And again, I have found that we can use our hardest experiences as ways to connect with others. And that's really the only way for all of us to get through the hardest times of our life, is to be willing to just open our hearts to each other kind of on a one-on-one basis, especially when we feel prompted to do that. And it can give meaning to our past struggles and the hardest things we've gone through. And it can also, so it blesses me to be able to put these hard things in my past into a productive light, or a way to interpret them that gives me strength instead of just pulls me down. And it's wonderful when, we can offer that to others and they can offer it to us.
So it gives us this tiny glimpse of Gethsemane.
Yeah.
And it tells us the Savior went through all of that so he could say to every one of us, and he's the only one that can really say it, I know exactly how you feel. But we get a chance in glimpsing moments to be that way for others, which is such a gift for us and for them. Heavenly Father lets us connect. And you are such a blessing that way. And we want to thank you so much.
Yes, thanks you. Thank you for being with us today. You are a jewel, and we are so grateful. And please, our viewers, share this beautiful message today, and so others can be inspired also. And please look up Angie Lucas on the internet. She's all over. And you can also
podcasts, everything.
You can also find her on Roots Tech. Just by going to On Demand on the menu and just typing in her name. And she's given some beautiful talks there about stories and about writing, about your experiences and things like that. And so just look her up. You will love it. We've been listening to her podcasts and they're just amazing.
Amazing.
And here we have her here today, and we just can't thank her enough. And
Yeah, my website's angielucas.com, and you can find me on Instagram at Angie Lucas. So yeah, pretty easy to find.
Perfect. Yes. Thank you
Awesome.
so
Thanks,
much.
everyone. And
Have a
have a great
wonderful
day.
day. Bye-bye.